Darkness falls across the land and the blood be spilling. The Dark Knight has been a main staple ever since Cecil stood broodingly on that frickin' airship, and now it is your time to dive deep into this dark missionary.
So, we're just done with phrasing, right? That's not a thing anymore?
And with this guide, I will help you bring the shadows and become the true warrior of darkness. Probably. Now before we start, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell thingy, and follow and host me on the Twitch and Twitters for fun moments like this.
Come on, you can do it!
And as always, I'll point out that this is not a guide to being a good tank. That is up there in the right hand corner, and I'll put it in the description below if you want to watch this video first. No, this is learning the basics of the Dark Knight, the moves, openers, rotations, and a little tip here and there sprinkled in to keep things interesting. So with that said, I am Tek, and this is my ultimate guide to being the best Dark Knight you can possibly be. Probably. Now the Dark Knight is all about that tank-based damage, being one of the hardest hitting tanks in the game. For the most part, this is to do with the upkeep of its unique darkside buff, but also because of its not so unique blood gauge. So at level 62, almost 30 levels after the other tanks, the Dark Knight will unlock the blood gauge, allowing the Dark Knight to spend said gauge on specific actions. Now this gauge can only be filled via a buff or specific weapon skills, but they are your most commonly used weapon skills, so there's no worries there. I swear I said that before. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can feast upon the best job quest series in the frickin' game, seriously, it's so frickin' cool! We must first unlock the job here at the Tribunal once you've reached the Foundation during Heaven's Ward. Yes, this is a job that you must finish the entirety of A Realm Reborn's main story and progress through the second expansion's main questline to unlock. Now this job starts at 30, but for us to get a better understanding and keep with the previous flow, we'll treat this like a little day 1 sprout. So, as with all the tanks, you begin with the trait Tank Mastery, which lowers damage by 20% but increases the max health and vitality while granting a bonus damage based on the strength stat. I've covered this a lot already, it's just the dev's way of mapping out that you are the tank. Now onto the skills. Hard Slash, our default move, deals a straight 150 potency worth of damage to the target, and really there's nothing else to say on the matter. Now at level 2 we unlock Syphon Strike, the follow-up attack to Hard Slash. This deals a fair 240 potency worth of damage to the target, while also restoring 600 MP. Again, nothing really much to say here. For any dungeon before Totorak, this will be your only single target option. Get used to it. Unleashed, learned at level 6, is our primary AoE attack for low level content before Stone Vigil. This deals 120 potency worth of damage to all enemies nearby, so spam this against mobs of 2 enemies or higher unless stated otherwise. The one downside is that this classes as a spell, meaning 1, you are susceptible to silence, which is rare, but when it does happen, if the healer doesn't remove it, well, you can't use it at all. And 2, while the majority of your other abilities which work on skill speed will have their cast time slightly reduced with the natural gear, unleashing all your other spell-based attacks will not, and will require materia to get that down. But there really isn't much of a need for that, I just need to let you know. At level 10 we learn Grit, our tank stance, and I've promised to drum this in until the cows come home. Always activate your tank stance when you are tanking. At level 15 we learn Unmend, our main ranged attack. It deals 150 potency worth of damage to the enemy, and it also increases our enmity gain. This is your main initiation tool, where in group pulls you would use the roll action Provoke. When you go up against a boss, this is the first attack you will use. You'll also use this move if you have to go out of range against bosses that have that specific mechanic. Doesn't show up a lot, but gets a little bit more damage. At level 26 we learn Soul Eater, the follow-up to Siphon Strike and our final piece to the 1-2-3 combo puzzle. This deals 320 potency to the target, heals you for 300 potency, and will fill the blood gauge by 20 when that becomes available. Wait, isn't that the same move as War? This 1-2-3 combo is actually stronger than spamming Unleash when there are only 2 enemies left. So whenever the Soul Eater combo is an option, for mobs of 3 or higher you're going to spam Unleashed, then switch to the Soul Eater combo for the remaining 2, if that situation crops up. At level 30, where we officially start, we unlock Flood of Darkness, a semi-long range AoE off global cooldown that sits on a oh so pleasing 1 second cooldown. Deals 100 potency to any enemy within the straight line in front of you, and will grant the previously mentioned darkside buff, boosting your damage by 10% for 30 seconds, that can be extended to 1 freaking minute, at the hefty cost of 3000 MP. This allows the Dark Knight to do what the Dark Knight do best, weaving. This is simply the action of using your off global cooldown skill in between your global cooldowns. As for an example here, in a group of mobs we will spam Unleash and pop Flood in between the cooldowns. So we go Unleash, Flood, Unleashed, Flood, rinse and repeat until you have no MP left, and this is the main intended use for the beginning levels. Now for those who've checked my warrior guide or keeping up with the series, I spoke about how there is not much point in going out of your way to use the Mithril Tempest combo in your single targets just to get the damage buff. Since they are both on the global cooldown, it isn't worth the time since you get the single target option a few more levels later. And Flood is also on that similar boat. There is a single target option that we'll be getting soon. However, because Flood is off the global cooldown, it's just an extra attack that buffs us, and we get a little bit of leeway with what we can do with it until we get our single target option. The idea is we get some practice in weaving our off global cooldown attacks and build a mini opener with this. It can't work! So for our first official opener, we'll start as always by pulling with unmend. Now we'll pop our Flood of Darkness for the darkside buff, then we land our Heart Slash, weave into Flood of Darkness, Siphon Strike, now Soul Eater into our final Flood. And then it's just rinse and repeat that 1-2-3 combo, keeping up your darkside. And this is practically the opener philosophy, weaving our off global cooldowns in between our globals. Every job does this, some more than others, and the Dark Knight does this the most compared to the other tanks. Now I will stress that Flood is just a placeholder here for our single target version. Once we get that, we never use Flood in our single target again unless it's our only option. Now at level 35 we gain Blood Weapon, a kind of reoccurring ability in Final Fantasy games. This incarnation sits on an edgy 60-second cooldown and grants 5 stacks of the Blood Weapon buff for 15 seconds, or until all 5 stacks have been used. Isn't that the same as the Paladin's Wrath? This buff grants the next weapon skill the ability to restore 600 MP on hit. Now this is a flat 600 MP for the fact the attack lands, not per enemy hit. This ain't no MP version of Bloodwetting. Really, this is going to slot just before that first Hard Slash. That way we get our MP back after our Darkside buff. There's also more reasons beyond the MP, but we'll cross that line when we get there. Shadow War, learned at level 38, is the Dark Knight's personal mitigation, sitting at the very standard for these skills 2-minute cooldown and reduces damage by 30% for 15 seconds. Literally every tank has one of these, and this is as basic as they come. Use these alongside the roll mitigations to attempt to outlive the mobs. At level 40 we learn both Stalwart Soul and Edge of Darkness. Stalwart Soul is the following attack to unleash, dealing a potency damage of 140 to all nearby enemies while also restoring a flat 600 MP on hit and filling the blood gauge by 20 when that's unlocked. So yeah, a very useful spell. This combo now overtakes the Soul Eater combo for damage on 2 enemies, so for 2 mobs or higher, this is the go-to. Edge of Darkness is the single target version of Flood, and the move it's been filling in for within our opener. It deals a powerful 300 potency worth of damage and applies the darkside buff for the same 30 seconds to 1 freaking minute. So just as a reminder, it's Flood of Darkness for mobs of 3 or higher, Edge of Darkness for single targets or mobs of 2. At level 45 we learn Dark Mind. This sits on a 60-second cooldown and interestingly reduces magic based damage by 20%.
I like your funny words, Magic Man.
So yeah, in this game there are physical attacks and magical attacks. Magical side tend to be like the Trials big hitters or something with an element applied to them. To be honest, it's really hard to tell exactly what is what. So while mitigation is mitigation, this move has been one of the hardly used button bloaters for years now. Now at level 50, parallel to the Paladin, we learn Living Dead, the Dark Knight's invulnerability tool. This sits on a heart-stopping 300-second cooldown and grants the effect of Living Dead for 10 seconds, to which if you would die to an attack that is not designed to end the fight, you will be placed into the Walking Dead status, where you'll be able to survive almost any attack with 1 HP left for a further 10 seconds, by which at the end, if you have failed to heal the equivalent of your maximum HP, you will die. Luckily, while in this state, your weapon skills and spells will also gain a 1500 potency cure to help guarantee you reach that mark. This heal is also one of those per enemy's hit deals, so one unleash on enough enemies will pop you back to full. But I hear you say, Tek, you tall, dark, handsome fellow, won't we lose our invulnerability once we're at full health? And to that I say, stop, you flatter me. And that at one point, that would have been the case. But no, if you do happen to heal to full, say with 8 seconds left on the Walking Dead, you'll be placed into another state called Undead Rebirth, where you'll still survive by 1 HP but lose the healing factor. So it's basically Holmgang with a lot more extra steps. Now while this is your oh shit button to be used in emergencies, it will probably see a lot more use in wall-to-wall pulls during dungeon runs. The invulnerability and now that healing factor make it a powerful tool, and there are not that many bosses outside of extreme or savage content where it would even be needed. So if you find yourself struggling to stay alive with a party, or even more relevant lately, the trust system, just pop Living Dead and keep yourself in the fight. Okay, opener recap. Now our level 50 opener is pretty straightforward. It's practically the opener we already have. We're just placing in the actual move we're supposed to be using alongside our buff, keeping that idea of weaving our off globals into our globals. So as always, we'll start with unmend, popping Edge of Darkness and Blood Weapon. Then we'll go for Hard Slash, weaving in our second Edge of Darkness into Syphon Strike. Then Soul Eater into our final Edge of Darkness. Then it's just a matter of using our Soul Eater combos to build up MP, keeping up our dark side till our next Blood Weapon. And really that's all we can do right now, but it's not about the opener. It's all about getting used to weaving in between our global cooldowns. And while we won't be doing exactly everything we're doing here in later levels, we are working out the best way to make the whole process feel natural. At level 52 we learn Salted Earth, our damage over time. This sits on a sodium overdosing 90-second cooldown and creates an area of effect on the floor around you that deals 50 potency damage to all enemies inside for 15 seconds. This is one of those all-arounders. You can use it against those big mob pulls or single targets. Opener wise, we'll slot it just after our first Soul Eater to take advantage of any buff windows and keep us all in time, but we'll go through that properly when we reach level 60. At 54 we learn Plunge, our gap closer. This sits on a fur 30-second cooldown and deals 150 potency damage to the target. As I said with the other tanks, you will hardly use this for its intended purpose. This is just a damage extender for our openers and bursts for the most part. At level 56 we learn Abyssal Drain, a 20-arm long-ranged AoE attack that sits on a 60-second cooldown and deals 150 potency damage to all enemies in the blast zone. The move will also gift you a 200 potency heal per enemy hit and restore the flat 600 MP we are accustomed to. On a single target, this really isn't going to add much on the grand scheme of things. The damage just isn't there, and a 200 potency heal off one enemy is pittance. This is meant to be an AoE based attack. You use this in big pulls to stay alive, but you can use it for single targets for now, until we reach level 60, the end of Heaven's Ward, and learn Carve and Spit, the single target equivalent to Abyssal Drain. This shares the same 60-second cooldown but deals a whopping 510 potency worth of damage, at the cost of removing that healing factor. Still, we get to keep that 600 MP restore, so that's nice, and this slots nicely into our opener, as we now have a bit of real substance, and a chance to get the hang of our double weave. Okay, so level 60 opener, and as always we start with unmend. Then we'll pop Edge 1 and Blood Weapon for our stacks. Go into Hard Slash into Edge 2. Syphon Strike. Soul Eater into Salted Earth for the dot. Then another Hard Slash into Edge 3. Syphon Strike into our double weave of Carve and Spit. And Plunge. Then a Soul Eater into Edge 4. Then one last Hard Slash into our final Edge of Darkness, and then it's all about finishing that Soul Eater combo, building up NP, and keeping darkside up. This is the main structure for our entire opener. The second Soul Eater combo is just a placeholder for now, but getting the art of double weaving those off global cooldowns is pivotal to the Dark Knight success, because we are going to get a lot more double weave options as we level up. Now at this moment in time we are also throwing MP caution to the wind, and as we start to grow deeper into our levels, we are going to have to start thinking about our consumption, but until we actually arrive there, just have at it. Also, I'll just point out, since this is probably the best point to say this, until you reach level 60, use Abyssal Drain as the placeholder for Carve and Spit. Damage is damage, and it will get you used to that double weave. Now level 62 we finally unlock our blood gauge, alongside the main attack it's spent on, Blood Spiller. This sits on the global cooldown but doesn't interrupt your combos, and delivers a powerful 500 potency to the target for the cost of 50 blood gauge. Wait, that sounds awfully a lot like Felcl. This is your main big hit attack when you have the meter. Really good stuff single target wise, and even does well against 2 enemies. But it won't do you any good in a group pull. That is where our level 64 skill, Quietus, comes in. This is the AoE equivalent to Blood Spiller, costing the same 50 blood gauge while dealing 200 potency damage to all nearby enemies. So we have an interesting combination here. For 3 enemies or higher, we'll be using our Stalwart Soul combo alongside Quietus to get the most out of our damage. Then if we reach 2 enemies, we will still be using our Stalwart Soul combo, but we'll be using Blood Spiller on each enemy. This is because the damage from Blood Spiller on each of the 2 targets outweighs the damage of the 2 consecutive Quietus hits. At level 66, Blood Weapon will gain the boon of building your blood gauge by 10 per stack. So 5 stacks means if you did 2 Soul Eater combos back to back, you will get 90 gauge for your troubles. The same thing kinda goes for the AoE attacks, as you will have 100 blood gauge in 3 Stalwart Soul combos, 90 in the Blood Weapon stacks, and 1 overflow from the final Stalwart Soul. This helps a lot in wall to walls, as you can get those big hits in a lot quicker, while in single target that first 50 gauge is a key piece in our opener, alongside Delirium, unlocked at level 68. This sits on a first 60-second cooldown and grants 3 stacks of the Delirium buff, allowing you to use either Blood Spiller or Quietus without needing meter, and will restore a flat 600 MP with those attacks. That's it, I've had enough. Right, let's see who's underneath. I knew it! Yes, it's very much the Warriors in a release with some Paladin MP recovery sprinkled on top. But this is our big blitz. You burn those snacks while weaving in your off-global cooldown attacks, and we have some massive numbers going. At level 70 we learn the Blackest Night, the OG. This sits on a very pleasing 15-second cooldown, and erects a barrier worth 25% of the respective target's maximum health for 7 seconds at the cost of 300 MP, the exact same cost as Flood or Edge of Darkness. This is no coincidence, because if the barrier breaks, you'll be granted a Dark Arts, to which you can spend on your Flood or Edge instead of MP, making this defensive tool what we call DPS neutral. You won't lose your damage button so long as the bubble breaks. This is the move that Intervention, Nascent Flash, and the soon to be talked about Art of Corundum were made to surpass. And in a lot of ways they kinda have. Sure, it's great for that tank buster and it's vital during wall-to-wall pulls, but the other three have healing factors, which, to be honest, I think Dark Knights from all over the world would be okay sacrificing the Dark Arts for. Still, it's an important tool and something we must keep in mind. We can no longer just go ham with our MP attacks, as like I said in Wall to Walls, this is a move you are going to be using every time it's off cooldown alongside your mitigation. Outside of Abyssal Draining Living Dead, you have no self-healing whatsoever. So managing your MP with the Blackest Night is how you are going to stay alive. Now you can use the Blackest Night in your opener just after Unmend, alongside Blood Weapon, and by the time your bubble ends, if you have been hugging the boss, the auto attacks and cleave should break the bubble and get you your Dark Arts. But this isn't always a given. Some may not have a cleave, some may rarely attack outside of the big hit at the opening, so you have to work around it. But that's the biggest skill to the Blackest Night, is knowing when it'll break. Okay, so we have enough abilities to make our main opener, but we are going to have to sacrifice a bit of fluidity for yet another mindset. We want to spend that first 50 gauge we get from our blood weapon before we go into our blitz. Now we'll have to use a blood spiller as our placeholder for the move we will actually spend the gauge on later, and this has some slight issues timing wise, but hopefully it will just get you into spending the gauge and keeping the actual blitz consistent. Also, I'll treat this opener as though the Blackest Night will break, but I will place the alternative opener in case it doesn't, because as I've said, these things can be finicky. Anyway, as always, we'll start with Unmend, popping TBN and Blood Weapon for our stacks. Then we'll go for Hard Slash into Edge 1 and Delirium. Then Syphon Strike, followed by Soul Eater for the 50 that we'll spend on the placeholding Blood Spiller into Salted Earth. Then we'll go for the Blitz of Hard Slash into Edge 2, Blood Spiller 1 into Carve and Spit and Plunge, Blood Spiller 2 into Edge 3, Blood Spiller 3 into Edge 4, Syphon Strike into Edge 5, and finally Soul Eater. Then we'll just build that blood meter and get our MP back, keeping our eye out for tank busters until Blood Weapon is at the ready. Now this opener is far from optimal. We have a global cooldown being a placeholder for, to be honest, a off global cooldown, so it does scuff the timing and flow ever so slightly. But I've chose this way to get you used to spending your meter with Salted Earth, to make that feel more natural, and as I've said, it keeps our blitz of the blood spillers consistent. And again, the Dark Knight is a different ball game to the other tanks because MP is involved. We may need to alter our opener to work around a big attack, especially if we know the bubble won't break at the beginning. Now when that happens, we alter the opener ever so slightly, which is simply, instead of starting off with the Blackest Night, we just use Edge of Darkness like we've been doing for the previous openers, using TBN after Soul Syphon and just opting out of one of the other edges. This is what makes the Dark Knight very good with these weaving. There's a little bit of leeway with our attacks. Now at 74, both Flood and Edge of Darkness upgrade to Flood and Edge of Shadow, upping the overall potency, so we get more damage and nothing new changes with the overall plan. At level 76 we learn Dark Missionary, our party-wide mitigation. Sitting on a 90-second cooldown, this reduces magical based damage to all who are inside the effect range by 10% for 15 seconds. Again, just like I said with the Dark Mind, magic is a lot harder to tell which is which, but most of the multi-hitting raid-wide attacks like Archmorn are magic based, so that will at least allow some defense there. Really wish it was just all damage, but yeah, maybe in 7.0. At 78 we get an extra plunge charge thanks to enhanced plunge, adding another double weave to our opener and a gap closer if need be. Now at level 80 we learn Living Shadow. This sits on a 2-minute cooldown and for 50 blood gauge will allow you to tire of this charade and summon Esteem, your simulacrum, who will attack the target dealing 240 potency per attack for 24 seconds. 6 of those seconds he wastes trying to actually show up, so it's more 18 seconds give or take. But yeah, it's basically a glorified dot, but it's a powerful one, and is key to that blitz of damage in our opener. This is what we were using Bloodspiller to placehold for, so I feel it's best to do a quick recap to get everything all up to date, and so you understand why I had you spend your meter in the 70 opener. So we start with Unmend and pop TBN and Blood Weapon, going for Hard Slash into Edge 1 and Delirium, Syphon Strike, Soul Eater into Living Shadow and Salted Earth for the blitz of Hard Slash into Edge 2, Bloodspiller 1 into Carve and Spit and Plunge 1, Bloodspiller 2 into Edge 3, Bloodspiller 3 into Plunge 2 and Edge 4, Syphon Strike into our final edge, and then it's back to building meter using Blood Spillers until our next Blood Weapon is up. Hey guys, this is me from Post Edit. Just remembered one thing that I didn't put in the video, and that is don't forget to use Living Shadow in your AoE options. A lot of his attacks are AoE based, so that's going to give you more damage. Don't hold it out just for the boss. Okay? Cool. Now at 82 we learn Oblation, a weird mitigation tool that sits on a 60-second cooldown, has 2 charges, and reduces damage taken by 10% for either you or the target party member. And if you have a feeling that this sounds like it should be a part of TBN as an upgrade, you wouldn't be the first. Yes, as opposed to beefing up the Blackest Knight like the other tanks did with their bubble moves, we get an extra skill to apply on top of that if we so choose to. This isn't amazing, but mitigation is mitigation, and I can see why you wouldn't want it on the Blackest Knight initially. The whole gimmick is we want this damn thing to break to get back the damage dealer we've just lost. Having extra mitigation on top of it may hinder that, so putting it on the actual move would be a bit silly. And this way we have an extra way to lower the damage to our bubble for big mobs without spending our big mitigators. This actually aids in our off-tankly duties, as we can now TBN the main tank and use Ablation on ourselves or even the healers, so it's pretty welcome. At level 84 your Soul Eater combo gets a potency boost thanks to melee mastery, and Enhance and Mend grants you the coveted boon of reducing Plunge's recast time by 5 seconds whenever you use it. And if you guys couldn't tell, I'm being sarcastic. This may see some noticeable change in a fight where you have to use range moves for a moment, but this is just another one of Yoshi P's failed attempts to make Unmend more than just our initiation tool. Trust me, he's been trying this for almost every expansion, and it's never going to happen. At 86 we unlock Salt and Darkness, a sort of follow-up attack to Salted Earth. This sits on a 20-second cooldown and unleashes a blast worth of 500 potency to the initial target with a 50% fall off to everyone else caught in the blast. This move becomes available the moment you use Salted Earth, and you can activate it anytime during Salted Earth's window. And it's another big damage off global cooldown to double weave with. At level 88, Esteem gets a damage boost to 300 potency thanks to Enhanced Living Shadow.
Nice.
Now finally at level 90 we unlock our ultimate attack, Shadowbringer.
He said it! He said it!
Yes, every tank gets one, and ours sits on a 60-second cooldown, has 2 freaking charges, and delivers an attack of 600 potency to the initial target with a 50% fall off to everyone else hit by this big old beastie boy. Hell, this move is so good, even Esteem wants in on the action, using the enhanced Living Shadow 2 trait to deliver one of his own, at 50 potency less. But hey, that's our glorified Dot, just getting more glory. Now with Shadowbringer we get not 1 but 2 extra double weaves in our opener and in our bursts. And because it's 2 stacks of 60-second cooldowns, it is a move that times perfectly into our 2-minute burst window. So while it can be an okay idea to time 1 Shadowbringer every 60 seconds after your opener, holding them every 2 minutes for just that big 2-minute burst is definitely the way to go. But we are now at level 90 and we need to slot these bad boys in. So, as always, let's start with unmend. Pop TVN and blood weapon, then we go into hard slash, into edge 1 and delirium. Syphon strike, then soul eater into living shadow and salted earth for the blitz of hard slash into shadowbringer 1 and edge 2. Bloodspiller 1 into carve and spit and plunge 1. Bloodspiller 2 into shadowbringer 2 and edge 3. Bloodspiller 3 into plunge 2 and edge 4. Syphon strike into salt and darkness, and our final edge, finishing with soul eater. Building that meter, using blood spillers until we get that blood weapon to go into our 1-minute burst, keeping our shadowbringers until living shadow comes off cooldown, and there we have it. It isn't optimal, but this opener will get you through all the boss fights you need. And now we've gotten you into that learning process of these openers, so that in the future you can look up the more optimal openers for the specific bosses you need, and you'll be able to get it down in no time. Now as for the wall-to-wall aspects, it's not a straightforward thing. It's more about prioritizing the Blackest Knight to take as little damage as you can, alongside of your defensive cooldowns. But we can have a go, and this is what I use in my endgame pulls, and it gives me no problems as far as I can tell. So as per the norm for the wall-to-wall, we will pull with provoke, but we'll pop a flood of darkness to help group the enemies up, then use unleash and pop oblation to get some defense as we make our way to our next lot of enemies. And when we're there, we'll use stalwart soul into delirium and blood weapon, then go for quietus 1 into the blackest night and abyssal drain, quietus 2 into shadowbringer and salted earth, quietus 3 into shadow wall and living shadow, unleash into flood and our last shadowbringer, and finally another quietus into our defensives like arm's length and rampart / reprisal, making sure we use up our salt and darkness before salted earth runs out. And by then, if the party's doing their bit, the majority of the enemies should be practically down to an easy manageable state, and you can kind of reverse engineer this for the lower level pulls, removing things that we don't actually have and applying it to that. Now the reason I show these wall-to-walls with the trust system is that the trust avatars take a lot longer to deal with an enemy mob than the party of players would, and a lot of DPS is lost in these pulls. But with this opener or rotation per se, we keep ourselves alive with enough resources to take the next wave on and still go for the boss all guns blazing. Still, there's a lot of problems with the Dark Knight doing these wall-to-walls, and that's how we'll segue to our final thoughts on the job. So overall, the Dark Knight is a tank after my own heart. In fact, since Heavensward it was my first main job, and it's still my main tank today. But I will say, after doing this guide series and comparing my experience, Dark Knight does feel like I'm tanking on hard mode. You'll still be able to do it, but the other tanks have it a hell of a lot easier. Despite all the mitigation, we are surprisingly squishy in the grand scheme of things. In single target fights there isn't really much of an issue, but the lack of a stable self-sustain kind of shows when you're making those big pulls. Hell, there's a section of the level 85 dungeon leading to the first boss that I literally had to use Living Dead to get past using the trust system. because they hit like a truck and your AI won't reach you in time to heal you. With every other tank I just popped the self-sustain moves and never had the same problem. And this all falls down to the Blackest Knight. At one point it was the GOAT, the benchmark for where the other bubbles needed to be. And sure, even back then it had its flaws, like this whole needing the bubble to break else it's a DPS malarkey that we still have today. But it was still better than the competition for the most part. Now it's miles behind. Everyone else gets a heal as part of their bubble equivalent. The paladin gets a regen, the warrior becomes a leech. Hell, Gunbreaker, the job we are going to look at next, has a pure big heal ski that triggers either after you go under 50% HP or when the bubble wears off, which is what the Blackest Knight should have had. Maybe not to that extent, but a 500 potency heal on break or wear off would be a big boost to your survivability and wouldn't make the Dark Knight better than the others. The Gunbreaker would still be the higher DPS and the Warrior and Paladin would still have the better survivability. This would just mean you are also in that contention. So come on Yoshi P, one simple change, let's f***ing go. But survivability aside, the biggest strength of the Dark Knight for me is that you are always doing something. I always feel like I'm doing a big corner combo in a fighting game when I play as the Dark Knight, or to make it more relatable to this game and this community, a melee DPS. The openers the Dark Knight has are so close to a melee DPS opener that in another universe the Dark Knight would have been a DPS. And it's been that way since Heavensward. Picking this job up after playing Dragoon, I never felt like I was doing much different. I was still weaving, double weaving. Hell, the only difference was that now when I got hit by an overlapping AoE, I survived and people were praising me. Just remember, as long as you keep your MP in check, pay attention to what will burst your bubble and what won't, this old goat won't let you down. And if you don't want to let me down, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, shadowbring that bell thingy, and follow me on the Twitch and Twitters. Also, if you have any tips and tricks you found yourself, let us know in the comment section below. And finally, tune in next time to where maybe we are lions with the Gunbreaker. But until that day, this has been TeknoOdin. Stay safe, claim skulls, smash bosses, and take care.